As we gear up to this special session, we've just learned what items the governor wants lawmakers to tackle. What's your assessment of that list? Is it a satisfactory list? Too many items on there, not enough? Can you kind of walk me through your assessment?
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Wes. It's not uncommon to have a special session, when especially you have emergency items that the governor laid out in January that died in the waning hours of session. So I knew we would come back. I didn't know what would be on the call, but I knew there would be at least a few items that the governor saw as unfinished business. There are items on there that were vetoed that he's given us an opportunity to cure the defect that he thought were in the bill to where we can get it to his desk for signature. And then there's been additional monies that have come from the federal government. There's been some legal decisions to free up some of those COVID dollars for tax relief that we didn't know about on sine die. And then, of course, today as well, the comptroller updated his biennial revenue estimate with an additional $7.5 billion that could be used for property tax relief or other items that the governor has seen fit, like CPS reform and cybersecurity measures that he deemed important. So a lot's changed since sine die. I'm not surprised we're back. But the House will meet at 10 a.m. and we'll get to work on the governor's proclamation.
We generally knew what the governor's priorities were, as the session wound down. But because this formal list came out just a day ahead of gaveling in, how does that affect the process to get some of these items, back on track? He himself mentioned that he wanted lawmakers to iron out some differences on a few key things before coming back here. But without that formal list until today, how does that affect the process?
Sure. So the House rules were pretty specific at how we handled these items. So it has to be germane to his proclamation. And some of the issues, like voter integrity, is very broad. So that gives us a lot of leeway in what that looks like, and whether it's a big omnibus bill or several small bills. And I expect dozens, if not hundreds, of election bills probably to be filed, because we all knew that was coming. And there's been over 500 bill requests to be drafted on various items. And many of those will not be germane to the governor's proclamation. So we'll have to go through bills that are filed and see if they're germane to the topics, because constitutionally we can't pass something that's not on the proclamation. And some of the items he put on there are very specific. And so maybe only one or two bills actually germane to that topic. But I'm sure those bills will be filed right now. Bill filing started today, and this office will go through along with the parliamentarians to see what's germane to the governor's wishes and proceed accordingly.
Close to half of the priorities on his list touch on education some way. What does that say about the state's influence in the classroom right now? Well,
you ask me what the most important thing here in Texas is. I say, what's the most important thing to you? Go look at your budget at your house, right? What do you spend the most money on? It's probably what matters the most to you. And I'm sure that's the same for all Texans, businesses large and small as well. We spend more money on education than we do anything else. So it is a top priority. And coming into this session, one of the things that probably kept me up at night was not fulfilling our promise to public education. After the 2019 session, we really had a robust debate and reform of public education funding. So coming out of COVID, when we thought we were going to have a huge deficit, we worked through the process. The economy came on strong. We did have some federal relief dollars. We were able to fully fund public education. So I'm not surprised we're talking about public education again. It is one of the number one subjects here in the Texas House. More bills get filed each session regarding public education than any other issue. And Public Education Committee hears more bills than any other committee, because it touches everyone's hearts, it touches everyone's district. Again, it's our number one priority because we spend the most resources on it.
One of the, things that people are watching for are, how Republicans and Democrats are going to be able to work together. This session ended on sort of an interesting note with the Democratic walkout and then the veto of the Article 10 funding. Article 10 back on the special session agenda. But I guess my question is, what is preventing Democrats from walking out again? And furthermore, what was your level of involvement to make sure that that Democrats would show up for a special session.
Sure, and I've been talking to Democratic and Republican colleagues since Sonny died, since the day we left here in June. Many are eager to get back to work. Many have asked the governor, for instance, to add things to the call, like CPS and foster care reform, and add additional resources to that. We're seeing a skyrocketing CPS child removals as children go back to school and teachers are seeing them for the first time following this pandemic, and the caseworkers are going out into the homes and seeing these young men and women and children in Texas. And the child removals are skyrocketing. Sleeping in CPS offices is through the roof. It's called Operation Child Watch. It's occurring across the state of Texas. That is a crisis we need to handle. We're seeing property tax appraisals are hitting mailboxes, and it's sticker shock, and people feel like they're renting their home from the government even after they paid it off from the bank. And now we have $7.5 billion in the state coffers. We have these federal dollars that judges now say we can use for tax relief. Those are real issues that Texans talk about at the breakfast table and at the dinner table. They talk about their tax bill. They talk about education. And so I'm not surprised we're back here talking about issues that Democrats care about too. There's a bill vetoed by the governor dealing with dating violence. It was a Democrat House member, a Democrat senator passed it. And he gave specific ways to change that bill to make certain that he wouldn't veto it again. And that will be, that's on the call, and that will be something we'll discuss going forward. So I think there's a lot of issues here. Article 10 is something that's near and dear to all, members that we want to make sure our staff is paid after September 1st. And so that's something that's going to, when we get to the governor's desk, he'll decide when he signs the next reiteration of Article 10. But I'm assuming he expects some of his other priority items to make it to his desk as well. So I have really good discussions with, specifically Democratic colleagues, asking them to fulfill their constitutional duties, to show up, fight for your districts, get some meaningful reforms done to issues that are near and dear to their heart as well.
Do you have a plan if there's a repeat?
My Democratic colleagues have been quoted saying that, all options are on the table. I respectfully, all options are on the table, for myself as well. I'm going to be willing to work with them throughout this special session to make certain that some of, the items that I just laid out are addressed in a very, very respectful, open dialogue, and we're going to have all the public debate, and members will be able to represent their districts, and that was the whole point of coming up to this building, is representing your districts. So I want them to show up and represent their districts.
Let's talk about your interim charges relating to the border. Can you explain the focus there and how the state can tackle some of these border issues beyond what the governor and some other state agencies at his direction are already implementing?
Sure, so we've been addressing border security since I've been in the legislature, and we've spent a lot of money since 2015, spent a lot of resources, man hours, infrastructure. We set up, security offices in the local area, prosecution offices down in the valley that deal with the influx of, not just illegal drugs, but, human smuggling and weapons, you name it. We've been addressing it from all facets. What I wanted to focus on was other issues that are impacting not just RGV all the way up to El Paso, but, communities throughout Texas. How is the increased immigration here in Texas affecting public education? How's it affecting healthcare? Some of the bigger ticket items we have here in Texas. What resources can we help deploy to these communities who are dealing with, this humanitarian crisis, this security crisis, this legal crisis? There are some very small counties with very limited resources, that are being impacted by this. And how can Texas, with this additional funding sources we have now, that with a returning economy that's very robust and more sales tax receipts than we could expect to date, and of course these almost $17 billion in federal dollar COVID-3 Relief Act that we have yet to appropriate from the regular session. Is there something we can do to help the infrastructure in those communities, whether it's transportation, healthcare, public education, you name it? We want to be mindful that this is a very, very complicated issue, and I want to give the committees here in the House the opportunity to discuss housing shortages. There's what's this doing to our local clinics and emergency rooms, and what can the state do to help beyond just the border security issue that we've been discussing now for almost 8 years.
What do you say to people who say that the list of items that the governor's laid out, and even some of the Republican priorities in general, as the session wound down and as we enter this special session, what's your response to people who say that these are misplaced priorities, that we should be working more on the grid, making even further improvements, addressing healthcare in additional ways?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, Texas House, I had a healthcare reform package that I thought was very innovative, and much of it got done, and it's actually been signed by the governor. We made it kind of mainstream here in the House to talk about healthcare reform. Criminal justice reform is a major goal of mine here as Speaker, that we also made it mainstream and pushed it through both chambers and got it to the governor's desk. Really innovative items. My response to that is we can do much more here in the Texas House than people realize. And in the legislature, we can talk about a myriad of topics and get them done. There's not a limited amount of oxygen in the room. So we did quite a bit on grid reform. We passed some massive changes to the PUC and to ERCOT. More accountability, more reliability, more communication, and we're not done. The governor released a statement this week asking the PUC to do more about generation internally within their own rulemaking authority. And I think that's important because I think we need to give those agencies the opportunity to implement the changes we've made in a very short period of time. And Wes, we're going to be back here in the fall talking about redistricting because we don't even have the census data yet. So if those who think we've not gone far enough with the grid, let's let the agencies make the changes we've required of them. Let them follow the governor's request, for additional rulemaking authority for additional generation for our coldest months and our hottest months. And then in the fall, we'll be back if we need to make additional changes. There'll be ample opportunity to accomplish more grid security and more added capacity for generation.
What's the strategy behind your choices for that Constitutional Rights Committee? Can you walk me through your thought process there?
It's an excellent question, and I appreciate. So it's very much precedented to have a select committee in a special session to deal with a laser focus, attention to items that the governor has called a priority, and that we'll come back for 100 sessions if we don't get it done. And my thought process behind the select committee was to get a broader perspective of House members involved. For instance, on the Elections Committee, there were no African Americans on the Elections Committee. And that was not by my choice, that was by committee preferences. And so members receive other committee assignments that they preferred over that committee. But I thought in this instance, with this the seriousness of election integrity, that I could create a committee that had an African American female and African American male on it, that we could diversify geographically and politically to get all perspectives to where we could say this was an election integrity bill that everyone had input on. And we took in all diverse opinions, and the Texas House made certain that it was a deliberative process. And that's the whole point behind that committee, is to just widen and broaden the viewpoints. And I think we accomplished that.
And it sounds like you're doing that really with that elections bill in mind.
Correct. I think that's something that impacts all 254 counties. And coming out of COVID, we saw some counties creating, in essence, a different election code. But we've come out of the pandemic, and I think we need to have a universal. I firmly believe we need to have a universal election code that applies fairly and evenly to all 254 counties. And any changes to that code need to occur in this building through that same deliberative process that we're about to go through, as opposed to happening at the local courthouse.
Is there anything else on the radar right now that you'd like to mention?
No, I think we have our plate full starting tomorrow.
Big plate full.
Yes, sir.
Well, while I have you, is in terms of just like the number of bills, I guess the number of priorities, where does 11 feel to you? Does that feel like it's, is it attainable? Is it achievable to knock all those out in 30 days? Or are we looking at, maybe a longer term goal there?
That's a question for the governor for what he sees as success out of those 11. These are very weighty topics. Some are very expensive topics. Some are very emotional, personal topics. 30 days is not a long period of time in the grand scheme of things, especially when you have certain rules here in the House where we we have to lay it out for so many hours and before we take it up, and we have to such advance notice for a committee hearing, and we want to make certain the public has an opportunity to travel to Austin to weigh in. That's, that was something that was important to us in the regular session. So 30 days is ambitious, but we have 149 hardworking House members that are, I'm sure, ready, willing, and able to take up their own topics within those 11 and get them done.